Formalism, Literary Theory and Practice, presented by Hanan Mudaffar. This is part of a series of lectures on schools of literary theory and their application to literature. Both theory and application are taken from Rivkin and Ryan's Anthology to Literary Theory, with the article on Shakespeare's King Lear used for the application. The presentation is enhanced with scenes from the 1975 BBC production of the play. Reading King Lear and watching a BBC production before starting the lecture would be beneficial. At the beginning of the 20th century, a major transformation occurred in the field of literary studies. This transformation marked a shift from studying literature through historical context and author biography to examining literature through its own language. Russian formalism and American new criticism were key players in driving this change, emphasizing the importance of analyzing the text itself rather than external factors. Understanding this methodological shift provides the foundation for comprehending the development and significance of formalism as a critical approach. This presentation traces the emergence and key ideas of formalism, followed by an application of these principles on Shakespeare's King Lear using Michael Holahan's analysis. Formalism emerged from two significant philosophical traditions. First, Husserl's philosophy of science emphasized the isolation of knowledge objects in their pure form, an idea that influenced Russian formalisms or Russian formalists to treat literary language as an autonomous object. Second, Croce's new aesthetic philosophy proposed that art grants access to a different type of truth than science, a view that shaped American new criticism. These intellectual movements provided the foundation for the formalist emphasis on literary language as a self-sufficient field of study. Together, they opened new pathways for analyzing literature without recourse to external social or historical context. Russian formalism developed directly from these earlier intellectual currents, but took a distinctive focus on what separates literature from ordinary communication. Formalists argued that literature possesses specific characteristics that distance it from non-literary language and external reality. Viktor Shklovsky's concept of defamiliarization highlighted how literature makes the familiar strange, encouraging renewed perception through creative language. Shklovsky's famous example from Tolstoy describes a character encountering a horse not as an object of utility, but as a strange and vivid creature, demonstrating how defamiliarization renews perception. Russian formalists contended that the true object of literary study should be the internal devices and formal structures rather than thematic content. By emphasizing the inner workings of literary form, they established a critical approach grounded in the analysis of narrative and poetic techniques. Building upon their foundational principles, Russian formalists introduced critical concepts that guided their analysis. In narrative, they distinguished between fabula, or story, which is the chronological sequence of events, and syujet, or plot, which is the artistic arrangement of these events in narrative structure. In poetry, they emphasized sound devices like euphony, rhythm, and rhyme, illustrating how poetic language draws attention to its own form. Roman Jakobson described poetic language as organized violence against ordinary speech, reinforcing the notion that literature disrupts normal communication. These ideas established a methodology focused on the internal mechanisms of literary works, providing a systematic way to analyze artistic techniques. Russian formalists proposed a theory of literary evolution distinct from historical determinism. They argued that literature evolves through the internal developments of artistic devices rather than the external social or political changes. An example they cited was Don Quixote, which parodied earlier Romance traditions, demonstrating literature's capacity for self-reflection and innovation. This emphasis on internal literary evolution highlighted literature's autonomy from historical forces. Their view laid groundwork for later movements like structuralism, which extended the analysis of internal systems beyond literature to broader cultural phenomena. The transition from Russian formalism to French structuralism reflected a widening of the focus on internal systems. Roman Jakobson played a pivotal role in bridging the two movements by highlighting the linguistic structures underlying literary forms. Structuralists developed the idea further, suggesting that culture as a whole operates through systems analogous to language. This expansion was propelled by imagery scholars such as René Wellick, Julia Kristeva, and Svitan Todorov, who spread formalist ideas across Europe and the United States. These developments set the stage for broader critical frameworks that analyze meaning through underlying structures rather than surface realities. As Russian formalism matured, other thinkers expanded its applications to diverse areas of literature and language. Vladimir Prop analyzed the structures of folk tales, identifying consistent narrative functions across stories. Mikhail Bakhtin extended formalism's insight into the social and dialogic nature of language, emphasizing phenomena like carnival and heteroglossia. These expansions enriched formalism by showing how literary forms could engage with broader social and linguistic contexts without abandoning formal analysis. Their contributions paved the way for more flexible and socially engaged critical approaches while maintaining a formalist core. In the American context, new criticism developed from formalist principles but introduced significant modifications. New critics rejected scientific models of analysis, focusing instead on the emotional and experiential truths communicated through literary form. They introduced the key concepts of the intentional fallacy, which warns against interpreting a text based on the author's intended meaning, and the affective fallacy, which cautions against judging a text based on the emotional response it elicits from the readers. Their methodology emphasized close reading, a careful, detailed analysis of how a text's language constructs meaning. This American school of thought continued the formalist emphasis on textual autonomy, but added a focus on the universality and experiential depth of literary meaning. In poetry, new critics identified a sharp distinction between poetic and ordinary language. Poetic language is connotative and layered rather than denotative and straightforward. Through techniques like paradox, irony, and metaphor, poetry reconciles specific details with universal meanings. Clint Brooks' reading of Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn exemplifies this approach, showing how the paradox of life and death in art generates rich layers of significance. The focus on linguistic craftsmanship underscored formalism's lasting influence on literary analysis, even as it evolved across genres and media. Formalism's emphasis on internal structure extended its influence into film and television. In film, formalism informed the analysis of how visual elements like set design, framing, and montage construct meanings. In television, the influence appeared in the structuring of narratives across production schedules and in the emergence of long-form serialized storytelling. Shows like True Detective, with its dual narrative structure, and Formalism, with its spiral storytelling, demonstrate the persistence of formalist principles. These examples illustrate how formalism's core ideas continue to shape narrative form in contemporary popular culture. With this foundation in place, we can now turn to a formalist reading of King Lear to see how these principles operate within a specific literary form. Michael Holahan's article, Look Her Lips, Softness of Voice, Construction of Character in King Lear, provides a formalist interpretation that questions the traditional notion of character as a consistent and stable inner essence. Instead, Holahan argues that in King Lear, character is formed through relational and fragile encounters, emerging particularly due moments of speech, silence, and emotional vulnerability. He highlights that Lear's final transformation does not represent a return to an authentic or original self, but rather marks an ethical reformation driven by his reconnection with Cordelia. Cordelia's soft voice and the image of her ripe lips become symbolic of a new ethical vision, one rooted in tenderness, mutual recognition, and relational fragility rather than authority or power. Holland emphasizes that the play's ethical knowledge arises not from grand philosophical declarations or heroic consistency, but from the painful and precarious moments of human connection. Through the formal elements of speech patterns, silences, and emotional ruptures, Shakespeare constructs an ethic of vulnerability that reshapes the meaning of character in the play. A crucial moment discussed by Holahan is Lear's desperate attempt to revive Cordelia. Lear clings to the memory of her gentle voice, recalling her voice was ever soft, gentle, and low, an excellent thing in woman. As Lear speaks, his voice falters, embodying his recognition that goodness lies not in power, but in vulnerable relationality.
A plague upon you, murderers, traitors all! I might have saved her, and now she's gone forever. Cordelia, Cordelia, stay a little. What is thou said? Her voice was ever soft, gentle and low, an excellent thing in woman. I killed the slave that was a-hanging thee.
'Tis true, my lords, he did.
Yeah, did I not, fellow? I've known the day with my good biting falchion I would have made him skip. I'm old now. These same crosses spoil me. Who are you? Mine eyes are not of the best, I'll tell you straight.
The moment signifies Lear's ethical awakening, marking a shift from valuing dominance to valuing tenderness and human connection. Holahan's reading highlights how Shakespeare constructs character through language fragility, underscoring the ethical lessons embedded in the play's emotional breakdown. Another scene Holahan analyzes is Lear's collapse, holding Cordelia's body and crying out, howling.
You are men of stones, and I your tongues and eyes. I'd use them so that heaven's vault should crack. She's gone forever. I know when one is dead and when one lives. She's dead as earth. Lend me a looking glass. If that her breath should mist or stain the stone, why then she lives.
Is this the promised end, or image of that horror? Fall and see.
This feather stirs, she lives. If it be so, it is a chance which doth redeem all sorrows that ever I have felt.
This primal outburst strips away language itself, revealing the rawness of Lear's grief. In this breakdown, all illusions of royal authority vanish, leaving only the wounded human being exposed. Holahan interprets this moment as the culmination of Lear's ethical journey. True wisdom is found not in power, but in the brokenness of grief and love. The scene demonstrates the formalist insight that literary meaning arises from the interplay between language, silence, and emotional rupture. Through this formalist lens, King Lear emerges not as a story of fixed character traits, but as a tragic exploration of how language, silence, and relational fragility shape human identity and ethical awareness. In conclusion, formalism revolutionized literary study by shifting attention from external context to the internal structures of literary texts. Russian formalists introduced the concept of defamiliarization and systematic analysis of narrative and poetic devices. American new critics emphasized close reading and the construction of universal meaning through language's paradoxical and symbolic functions. Formalism's legacy persists in fields as diverse as film, television, and cultural theory, testifying to the enduring relevance of its insight. In the formalist reading of King Lear, we see how Shakespeare's own use of voice, silence, and relational fragility constructs ethical meaning without relying on stable character essence. Holahan's analysis shows that King Lear's greatness lies not in a portrayal of consistent traits, but in dramatizing the fragile human need for love and recognition. In the end, formalism reminds us that the heart of literature lies in how language itself transforms human experience into lasting art. Thank you for your attention.